right. Well, welcome everybody. I am Lisa Ivy. I'm here with my friend Travis Gordon, and we are also here with Ted Francisco, retired special agent from the Department of Homeland Security Investigations. And we're going to talk a little bit today about what human trafficking is, online exploitation, things parents need to know, and why it's important for them to be aware of what their kids are doing online. So we'll start with you, Ted, and tell us a little bit about your background in law enforcement and why this is important to you.
Okay. So basically, I spent about 35 years in law enforcement. Started out 13 years in North Carolina as a city cop, and then got hired with U.S. Customs, and which later became Homeland Security, and worked 21 years as a federal agent. The last 12 years of that was here in Knoxville, Tennessee. And once I got to Knoxville, not a whole lot of international drugs coming through Knoxville. But what I did find that there was a lot of in this area was child exploitation, sex trafficking. And so sort of wound up doing those types of cases, and then ended up doing a lot of education and outreach stuff in the schools and community from that. So that's where I sort of get my end to this part of the industry. And I've been doing that now. Even I retired almost 4 years ago, and still doing a lot of the education stuff with that.
Yeah. Okay. So when you're saying words, and I've already said the words like domestic minor sex trafficking or online exploitation, give us some definitions of what that actually looks like practically and what parents need to know about that.
So online exploitation is anything that someone causes you to do or has you do against your will by threat or offer of other things, whether it be money or threats of violence or whatever. But they are causing you to do something that you don't necessarily want to do. For sexual exploitation, as an example, a young gentleman gets on a webpage, gets into a chat with someone, and is convinced to send a photograph that he shouldn't send. As soon as he sends that photograph, okay, I'm not this, super hot model. I'm actually a 35-year-old guy, and now I've got a picture of you. And so either you deposit $5,000 into this account, or if you don't post more pictures or do a video, then I'll send this information, all the pictures that I have, to everybody on your friends list. So basically enticing you or coercing you to do something for their gain, whether that be monetary gain or gratification on the predator's part.
Mm-hmm. How does that differ from actual trafficking? Because there's a difference between the two.
Absolutely. A lot of the difference there is your trafficking involves physical separation from the world that you're in, your family, whatever, and you get actually physical contact. Online exploitation, which a lot of times leads to the trafficking or leads to abductions in some cases, but the vast majority of the time, that is you're being victimized online on an online platform. Sex trafficking is any as it relates to sex trafficking. There's also labor trafficking and other things as well. But what we're discussing is the domestic minor sex trafficking. It is when you're coerced to have a sex act for the gain of someone else, and that's either through fraud, force, or coercion. If you're over the age of 18, but any situation under the age of 18, there does not have to be fraud, force, or coercion involved. But that's a sex act for gain for someone other than you and than yourself. And we can get a little more into that, but that's basically what that is.
Yeah. And I think it's so important. We'll get into this a little bit more in a minute, but I think it's so important to note that if a kid is being exploited online, they may never meet that predator in real life. Like, that could be somebody living on the other side of the planet, exactly, and the child is never going to actually make physical contact with them. Whereas if they're being trafficked, there's going to be some physical interaction that takes place there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the largest percentage of people who are brought into the actual sex trafficking world is their initial contact with that world is through social media, through the internet. you see the movies with Taken, and that's fairly accurate. But there are initial contact through modeling agencies or stuff to bring people out of the worlds that their country or the world that they're in to give them a better life, and that's the coercion or the fraud part of it. But the vast majority in the world we live in today is has the initial contact with the trafficking world through social media or through the online avenues.
Yeah, which is so crazy when you think about how much all kids are using social media. And you're sitting here and saying this is really the entryway into this world. And I don't think a lot of parents are aware of that. So I'm glad we're having this conversation today. One of the things that we really focus on with Project Post is internet safety. And just as you were just saying, this is often the origin point for exploitation as well as trafficking. Tell us a little bit about your experience of seeing this even here in East Tennessee, because I know a lot of parents probably think this is happening on other parts of the world. It's happening in bigger cities, Nashville, New York, those types of places. But what happens here in East Tennessee?
So because of the vast amount of people who get involved in the trafficking world and the exploitation world do so through those social media platforms, it's extremely important that we understand how to be safe online. Like you said, there's really no way in the world we live in today that we can function along with everybody else without having a digital footprint. A lot of schools now are going away from physical textbooks and everything's online. Kids now have devices of some sort when they're tiny. And so you've got to understand that we live in a digital world. So the question for the parents is, how do I make this digital world safe for my kids? Sort of like driving a car. Most people in America are going to wind up driving a car at some point. What do you do to prepare your child to drive that car? Do you just throw them the keys when they're 10 years old and say, have at it? Or do you prepare them for that? The laws require certain things, but as a parent, as someone who's responsible for them, you've got to do that. But yet we hand them a phone with no guidelines whatsoever. So what I've seen over the years, and I've done presentations in East Tennessee for probably close to 15 years now, and have spoken to over 20,000 students and thousands of parents and adults as well. Multiple schools have called me back to sit down with specific parents who's, after the presentation, a student comes and says, hey, I'm in this situation. And so what I have learned over a period of time, and the thing that I tell parents more than anything else, and it's not easy all the time, is you've got to be the parent. If we get to be friends with our kids along the way, then that's gravy. But we've got to be the parent. We've got to know what they're doing. These people say, well, I don't want to invade their privacy and I don't want to do something that's going to make them pull away from me further. But you've got to protect your kids. And the biggest thing you can do, easiest way that you can do that is by being the parent. Know who their online friends are. Make sure they're aware of what the guidelines are. So often, like I said, parents will give their kids a phone with access to the entire world and no guidelines other than that. And I've got story after story, and we've discussed a lot of this where parents are shocked when their daughters wind up in a bad situation. They're like, how did this happen? Well, the only guideline you said was don't friend anybody on Facebook that isn't family. Well, there's 1,000 other platforms, and they did exactly what you said. They didn't friend anybody on Facebook that wasn't family, but they went to Discord and Twitch and all of these other platforms and YouTube and TikTok and Instagram. And those are prime hunting grounds for predators. And so it's important that you know what your kids are doing online.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, just even in the last few minutes, you've mentioned examples with males and also females. And something that I run into in my experience going out and talking about trafficking is that so many people think that this is just a problem that affects girls. And they don't realize that kids, it doesn't matter. Kids are vulnerable. Male, female, doesn't matter. Boys are just as susceptible to being exploited online as girls are. So do you see that in your everyday world right now?
So since I've retired, my current job, I'm head of security at a local private school. And part of what I've done in the process of being there and with what I'm doing with security is developed a mentorship program. Um, Not only with our school, but multiple schools. Like I said before, I get calls from principals that says, "Hey, we've got kids who are in trouble. They've gotten into a situation," and so through the mentorship program, especially with the young guys, who the same situation I told you, they're chatting with someone they think is a girl. They wind up posting pictures that are inappropriate, and then wind up in a rough situation. So this is becoming more and more prevalent within the young men, and probably in all of East Tennessee in the last year and a half, there's probably 10 or 11 teenage boys that I have talked to and mentored and worked with their families in that. One situation in a county northeastern Tennessee was especially interesting, I guess, and wound up not being as bad as it could have been, but multiple photographs, videos, and it was all for money gain. We actually were able to pull some of that information and link it to a well-known exploitation group out of Jamaica. So these guys think they're talking to a young lady in the next city over, next county over, and actually they're talking to a group of people who are running an exploitation in Jamaica, where they have an office building with 1,000 people on the phones doing the exact same thing. So it's absolutely a targeted attempt at the young people, and the primary ages are from 12 to 16. And that's the time. I mean, I remember when I was that age, thank God that we didn't have social media like we do now. I probably wouldn't be here today, because that's just, our kids today have a whole different set of issues and problems that we didn't deal with when we were that age. So that's why it's even more important for parents to take an active role in what they're doing.
Yeah. Gosh, and I feel for these kids too, because the examples that I know you and I both see, it's the things that any kid would fall for. And I think that's a tough thing for parents to wrap their minds around too, is that it's not that your kid is a bad kid if they fall for this. You know, they're a kid and they're vulnerable and they're falling for a really well presented scam.
Absolutely. And if I, as a teenager, if you had a teenage boy, a 14-year-old boy, if you had a 50-year-old man that looked scrungy, dirty T-shirts, cut off jeans, what people typically stereotype as the predator was to walk up and say, "Hey, why don't you come with me to my house?" Most teenage boys are going to run the other direction and go, "Yeah," and tell mom or dad. Same thing with the young ladies. They see a creepy dude coming up, they're going to run the other direction. So it's not the creepy dude. It's the well-dressed person, or online, it's the person who is most like you. One of the videos that we did in Project Post was we called him Creepy Bobby. That's what everybody sort of called him. And he's communicating with a boy online, and he's talking about Star Wars, and he's talking about baseball and the things that are important to this young boy. And then at the end, it's "Hey, I'm not Bobby, and I'm not 13 years old." And that's what gets these kids. It's something, and that's part of what we call grooming. And you have to get something that they're interested in, that hook, to get their attention to begin with. And you're right, it's something that it's easy to fall for, and that's what predators do, and that's their job, and that's what they do, and they're very, very good at it. And that's why we need to be very, very good at being parents and doing the thing that we need to do to protect our kids.
Yeah, these people are professionals.
Absolutely.
Like, they are getting up, they are going to work every day in office buildings to do this job.
Absolutely.
And so it's not just the random person. Right. It is a person that this is my 8 to 5. Just like you go to work every day, they go to work every day, and so they do this day in, day out. And so they are absolutely professionals at what they do.
Absolutely.
In every sense of the word.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think kids don't think about that either. You know, they don't consider kids. I remember being that age, and I'm sure y'all do too. Like, when you're a teenager, you're invincible and you're smarter than everybody on the planet. So the idea that somebody on the internet that's old could outsmart you is crazy to the mind of a teenager. But we see it happening all the time.
Yeah. and now especially, and we may get into this a little later with the new thing, and something that I'm having to learn about myself is the whole AI. This whole AI thing is really just bizarre, and that's a whole new facet of protecting your kids from the online stuff. And again, we can get into that. It's fairly new for me, and so I'm learning as I go along. But I'm getting more and more. We had a thing at our church not too long ago where we had a panel. Some of the pastors talked, and then afterwards, I was available for questions, and that was the number one thing that was brought to mind. What about AI? What about AI? What about AI? And we've had a couple of cases of that at our church where that's been an issue. So.
Yeah, and speaking of AI, so the predators are also using AI, and so once they start this conversation with the kid that they're looking to start this dialogue with, the kid gives them a few pieces of information, and so they can take an AI prompt and say, "Hey, I'm having a conversation with a 13-year-old kid who's into Star Wars. What kind of topics should I talk about?" And the AI is going to feed that real agent who's starting that conversation and going to tell them how to have that conversation with them. And so they're not only using it to make the contact, they're using it to figure out how to build that rapport with that young person. So you mentioned the word grooming. I think parents have heard this term, but maybe not necessarily really understand what it is. So tell us a little bit about what is grooming, and how does that conversation start usually?
So basically, what grooming is, and like we were saying before, your online predator will find something they have in common with the child, and they'll look for key things that person is putting online in general anyway, either through social media platforms or chat rooms or whatever it is, and they're looking for key things. They're not looking for the strong-willed person who's confident in what they're doing and hey, I've got a great job. I've got a my family life's wonderful. I got a great girlfriend. I'm on a star football player. That's not who they're looking for. They're looking for the person. She broke my heart, or he broke my heart, or life stinks, or I can't go on like this anymore, or whatever it is. And they're looking for things to key in on. My parents don't understand me. That's one I hear a lot. And so they're going to key in on that, and they're going to be, maybe your parents don't understand you, but I do. Or maybe, and looking for things. We had a situation up in Jefferson County, had a student, and she was convinced. She was talking to a 8th grade. She was in 7th grade. She was talking to an 8th grade boy in the local college, or in the local middle school there, in the same county. And winds up being a 30-year-old guy in Honduras, I believe, is what we wound up finding. I found out about it because I get a response from Interpol, and because they've located this organization in Honduras, they reach out. They said this person's reached out, so we go, and it was like reading a manual on grooming from the very beginning that this young lady made contact with this guy. And it was everything that she liked. And you could look at her previous posts, the things that she liked, and that's what he keyed in on. And it was, whether it be soccer, and she liked soccer. And so they'll look at those things, and then they'll groom them. They'll convince them that you're the most important thing to me. And even though your parents don't understand you and don't love you, I do. And so it's anything that they can do to gain the confidence and of that child, or not just children, but adults do this exact same thing. I've had several situations where I've had people call, and one in particular is one of my moms and very good friends at an assisted living place in North Carolina. I go in, and mom's like, this is 5 years ago, and she's like, this lady, and she's talking to me about this stuff. So this lady was convinced that the guy she's talking to online was a retired general. And it's got pictures and the whole 9 yards, but it's the same type of thing with kids. But it's everything about them. If I were to, an online predator is not going to do this without the research. Like you said, it's their job. They're not going to be talking to a girl who is an academia star about volleyball and sports if that's not what she's interested in. They're going to find those things that are interesting, that they're interested in, and that they have in common. And then, of course, the ultimate goal is to exploit them online, or in a worst case scenario, in person as well.
Yeah, and going back to this whole idea of them being professionals, I mean, they are building databases. I mean, they have, basically a CRM, like you would have at a business, and they're building these profiles. And so, even if that person is off work the day, the next person can come in and read the profile, and they can know how to interact with these kids. And and the reality is that they don't have to do a lot of digging, because oftentimes if kids have their social media public, they're already giving them all that information anyways. And so I think that's one of the things that makes it a real challenge, is we have to start those conversations with the kids on how to keep that stuff private, because you're giving it away for free, usually, and that's how they build those conversations. So what other tactics do online predators use to groom or manipulate kids? You mentioned looking for vulnerable. So what else do you see them doing to try to help start that conversation?
Again, things that they have in common is the most I guess the most popular avenue, and whether that be where they go to school, the things they do, and a lot of the times we put that stuff right out there for them to have. And guess what? As parents, we do. How many of you think it's a good idea to put your child's name and date of birth online for everybody to see? Well, of course, nobody says that they do that. But my son, when he got his driver's license, I take a selfie of me and my son. So proud of Benjamin on his 16th birthday, got his driver's license on the first try. So I just gave everybody out there that's on my social media platform on Facebook his name and date of birth. So not a bright thing for parents, and we do it on a regular basis. But it's a lot of the information that we put out there that they use to farm that and to develop those relationships. And again, as parents, if we're watching, if we're aware of what our kids are doing online, that the likelihood of that happening is much, much less than if we're just oblivious to what's going on.
Yeah, and we give the kids a hard time about what they're posting to social media. But one of the famous examples I always like to use is that old first day of school picture that parents love to post. And the picture is great, and you're excited, and they're growing up. But usually it has a whole list of things that they're into. Like when I was in second grade, my favorite color was blue. And my dog's name is this. And then a lot of those things that you give away end up being security question answers, like what street did you grow up on? And so we give away a lot of our kids' information, not maliciously, not even really on purpose, but we don't think about it. And so we're giving away that information every time we take that picture on our front porch on the first day of school.
You're right.
And so that's one that people can really relate to.
And just like you said, they have databases. And again, this is, I think for a long time we thought predators was just a sporadic thing. Occasionally this might happen here or there. There may be a bad guy here or may be a bad guy there. But this is organizations, literally thousands of people that are online attempting to exploit children and adults on a regular basis. And having that understanding, we still do stuff that doesn't make sense. Even before the internet was a big thing, I would do training sessions with adults about what do you do and what you don't do. If you're going on vacation for 2 weeks, you have them stop your mail so your mailbox is not overfull. You don't talk about it in the line at the grocery store. Hey, we're going to Hawaii for 2 weeks. These are things that most people understand. We don't do that. But then you post on social media every single thing that you do, and you're right. Build it back in real time. And then there's actually these are not just a bunch of creepy folks in a dark room. These are highly technologically advanced folks, and they actually write algorithms to search stuff like that, to look at the things that you're talking about, where you're going to school, and they don't have to look back at 1,000 different posts. They have an algorithm that's set up that scans everything that you've posted and tells you everything about you. Most people don't understand. Over 50% of men, part of their password is their anniversary. And the reason for that is that's one date that they don't want to forget. So
it does get you
a
in
very
trouble.
high percentage of men use their anniversary as part of their password. And these algorithms real easily can figure out someone's password unless they're security conscious and use that really weird, long, messed up thing that is auto-generated, which most people don't do that because they want to remember what they're doing. So, but there's a lot of different things in there that we don't really think about.
Accounts are getting hacked everywhere now because of that information Chet just
Absolutely.
gave out.
Yeah, so anniversary, birthdays, and pet names.
Yeah,
Yes.
And
absolutely.
so if you're posting about your pet on the internet, like they can probably guess your password.
Yeah.
It's not that hard.
So something that I had not considered as a parent until I met you was birthdays.
Yeah.
And I know you hit on that already, but like every parent I know posts kids of their pictures of their kids on their birthdays. Like, it's my kid's birthday. We're so excited. We just had the birthday party,
Yep.
you know? And that's something that is used not just in exploitation, but it's used in identity theft.
Yeah.
Which is a big issue that kids are facing right now. And that's been new information for me, that kids are up against that and
Yep.
don't realize it.
So my son is in college now, and just applied for his first credit card about 6 months ago, and lo and behold, got a notification that his name and social security number are on the dark web, and his name is being used by somebody else. And so that is
What did his dad post on social media?
So that is my son, and so we had an issue with getting his birth certificate from Texas, and so looking at all of that stuff, we found there was a couple of security breaches in the hospital where he was born, and so then we checked, and my daughter's is also. So it's just, and you don't think about these things unless it pops up. I mean, because we are very safe pretty much now with what we do online, but you don't think about these things. And we had moved away from there and had been gone from there for years, and so we never even knew about the security breach. But both my son and my daughter's names and social security numbers have been used. We tried to do the way I found out about my daughter was we attempted to do her FAFSA application this last year, and they wouldn't complete the application. It says this social security number doesn't match. That's not the name that we have. So I had to go through Social Security and get all of it in. But it's just you don't understand and realize the complexity of what these organizations are doing. And you're right. It's not just the exploitation, sexual exploitation. It's identity theft, and it's other things as well. You know, if just getting that information. And exploiting you and or your family. And one thing that I talk to kids a lot about, and they're like, well, I'm not really that big on social media, and I'm not that important anyway, or I'm a solid, I've got a good head on my shoulders or whatnot. Well, what happens, 10 years down the road or 15 years down the road when you're running for an elected position, a political position, and something that you posted on social media 15 years ago pops back up? And we've talked about this multiple times, actors and athletes and whatnot that have lost their jobs and lost their scholarships because something that they posted in 7th grade winds up out in the public. And it's it's more than just the sexual exploitation that is an impact. That, of course, being the most damaging.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think something interesting that you hit on a minute ago is things parents are sharing online. And one of the differences that I have seen pre-phones versus post-phones, smartphones, iPhones particularly, is that before your kids had those smart devices, if you wanted to exploit a child or abuse a child or groom a child, you had to groom the whole family. So you had to get mom and dad on board and convince them you're a good person, and they had to allow you to have access to their child. Post phones, that's not necessary. But something that you hit on a minute ago is what parents are sharing on their own social media accounts. And I think that even includes like who you're sharing things with. Because most of us as adults probably do not consider having private accounts. And we probably also don't go through and clean up our friends list a whole lot. But we've got friends on there. I know I do, like on Facebook. I've got friends from high school that I haven't seen in a few years. We won't mention how many. A couple of years, And so I have no idea what's going on with those people, or if they are people that should have access to pictures of the kids, or, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So as parents, I think we need to take the advice that and I speak to myself as well, that we're giving our kids. We've got to be careful what we post on social media. And you're right. Most parents are like, well, I'm the parent. And I'll say this again as we're going, be the parent. But you've also got to understand what you post also can impact your kids, not just monitoring what they're posting, but you've got to be cognizant of what you're putting online. And this was years ago, but we were getting ready to go out of town for an extended period of time. and we had taken for some reason, my wife got a picture of our kids together, and this was probably 10 or 12 years ago, and posted it. And then so I'm just flipping through pictures, and this is probably a year later when the memory came up, and I'm looking, and then I look, and behind us is our calendar with the red lines through the dates, vacation of the dates that we were going to be out of town. And so you've got to be it. And I don't want to make it like you feel like you can't do anything, but you just got to be aware of what you're posting and do so wisely. And again, the most important thing that you can do is make sure you're involved with what your kids are doing online. And we can get into a little more of that.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some signs that you see, just some practical takeaways that a child might be being groomed? Like what, even if things look normal on the surface in your house, everything seems fine with your kid. What are some like first clues for a parent to be aware of?
So you're looking at their behavior, their actions. If you've got a really outgoing kid who's involved and engaged with family stuff, and then for no explainable reason, they start pulling away from that. Or if they're on their phone and they close out the phone and set it down when you walk in the room. Or if they're secretive about who they're talking to or who they're sharing information with, or not engaging in the things that they normally engage in. Most kids who are involved in something like that are not going to be able to hide it. There's very few kids of that age, because their brain is not developed to the point to where that's something that they can figure out. Okay, let me keep acting normal as I'm going through this trying situation, or as this person's exploiting me online. And so that's why we encourage parents to be involved, but also in talking to 15 to 20,000 kids over the last 12, 15 years. Encourage them. You've got to be able to trust someone. And I can't tell you how many schools I've gotten called back to after doing a presentation where students have come forward and said, "Hey, I feel like I'm being groomed online," or "I feel like this person is not who they say they are," or one of various different situations like that. The biggest thing is you've got to be engaged with your kids and what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so often, the relationship online plays out as a romantic relationship. And that's something that's really tough for kids to hide as well. If you've got a middle schooler who has a new boyfriend or girlfriend, even if that started online, somebody's going to hear about that somewhere.
Absolutely. And again, that's where a lot of the predators will hit, is in their emotional, because even though kids, guys, their brain doesn't fully develop till about 24, 25, girls about 22 or 23. But even their thought process, I guess, intellectually is different than emotionally. Intellectually, you can sort of hide some of the stuff. But emotionally, it's very, very difficult at that age, because your hormones are all over the place, your emotions are all over the place, and so it's very difficult to hide that. So it's and that's why a lot of your predators, that's the area they hit, is the emotional part of it. Not hey, you're an incredibly smart person, and I would like to read books with you. It's more of a I know you're sad. I understand that, you've not got what you need from parents or a boyfriend or whomever, but I can provide that for you. So they also focus on that emotional part as well.
Yeah, by and large, the kids aren't starved intellectually.
Right.
At that age, they're looking for some sort of relational, emotional connection.
Exactly.
And so that's the easy way in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially when kids are advertising it, when they're making that a super obvious thing all over TikTok about how mom and dad are the worst.
And that's something that, we didn't see a whole lot, because then you're verbalizing it to, I'm verbalizing to my friend that my home life is not great. Well, my friend is friends with my mom. His mom is friends with my mom. So guess who finds out by the time I get home? And mom, okay, why do you think your home life is not great? So it's very different now, because then they can go on the social media platforms and on this isolated place for them that mom and dad don't see. And the biggest thing I think with my kids, they knew that dad saw. because I check their stuff. I went online. I know who their friends are. When my son was gaming, and that's another area that we can get into. But when he was gaming, I'd walk in the room, and if I saw a user tag that I didn't recognize, a gamer tag I didn't recognize, I'd grab his headset. Who is this? And if it wasn't somebody I knew, yeah, you don't need to be on here playing games with my son. My son hated that to begin with. But then I actually had some of the parents call, hey, have you heard my kid do anything that they shouldn't be? I'm like, hey, you're the parent. That's your job. But my son now has, and we've actually had this discussion just recently, he's very grateful that at that time he didn't like it, but he's very grateful now that I intervened and he even said, you probably kept me from doing things that I probably would have done other than the fact that I knew that you were going to check my phone, or other than the fact that I knew that you were going to see who I'm online gaming with. Then it was an annoying and a pain for him, but now as an adult, he's like, you probably saved me from a lot of grief, and my daughter's the same way. So
Yeah, and I think I hear that a lot from parents who have been active in monitoring what their kids are doing online, and also parents who have delayed some technology. I hear a lot from their kids as their kids are hitting that college age. They're like, man, I'm really glad that I didn't have an iPhone when I was 12, know? So I think that's a positive there as well. Okay, so you've already hit on this a little bit, but I know a lot of parents are thinking like, I don't want to end up in this situation. I feel like I've done everything, but there's still a possibility. Predators can get around parental controls. We're going to get into that some later, but they can get around parental controls. They can get around those parent monitoring apps. How does that happen? And what would you say to parents who are in those situations going like, I feel like I've done everything that I should do, but still there's this risk?
And so I've got a couple of situations like that I'm working with the parents right now. And there's not a be all end all. Because even if I've got a really good friend who their house is locked down like Fort Knox, and they've got the server, the router, the firewalls, the everything, and he and his family, the kids, everybody is restricted on how much stuff can come in. But guess what? Kids go to school, kids have friends, so being able to totally restrict and prohibit. Or keep your child from potentially being a victim is almost impossible. That's why it's so important that you be involved and engaged in your kid's life. And again, I'm going to say it again and again, be the parent. And that doesn't mean being overbearing all the time, but you've got to be involved and engaged. My son played games that I didn't like, I didn't care for, just not my thing. But I would take time and go sit down with him and get him to teach me how to play. And so that way, when I would go in and say, hey, who's this gamer tag I don't recognize, it was not that big of a deal because it was something that he was used to me sitting down playing games with him as well. And some of you may say, well, I don't know how to game. Right? Be engaged. Just be involved in your kid's life. And I know that's difficult. There's times I would work 18, 20, 28 hours sometimes with my job previously, and I would come in and the last thing I want to do is deal with a 14-year-old teenage boy and the stuff that goes on with that. But I made the decision a long time ago that would take priority. And so you've got to look at some things that you can do. There are ways to benefit and to help. There's a lot of things out there from routers and software and some hardware stuff as well. Well, I don't want my kid to look like a weirdo with a flip phone. There are some good phones that look like smartphones that are very safe, that allow you to call or text a handful of people, and you can still have them have that technology. But again, the biggest thing is our job is to protect our kids, and so whatever you've got to do to accomplish that is what you need to do.
So did you find with your kids that it got easier with your daughter being the youngest, going through some of this stuff? Like, was she more prepared because she'd seen you go through it with your son?
She was, and she's a little different anyway because she's pretty sharp. She's like most of this stuff for her was, yeah, Dad, it's not a big deal. That's I've got this, and that was pretty accurate. And she's in college now as well, and but yeah, it was seeing what he went through with me and with us, and it sort of eased and softened the blow, I guess, for her. And she had the same restrictions, and they both managed pretty well. Actually, my son at one point came to us after he was out of the house and said, "Hey, I want to install my Instagram account on your phone so you see my Instagram." And this is while he's in college. He said, because I want you to see, so anytime someone has to follow him or he follows someone, we have access to that on our phone. And that was his choosing. He decided that he wanted to do that. So it's a process. A lot of questions will get how old, when should, that depends on the individual. That depends on the person. Kids have devices at an incredibly young age now, and so having these conversations early on is very important. Probably my kids are different from most because they've heard this since they were able to hear, and so it's been a little bit different. But even that doesn't exempt them from being targets of predators. So it's important that they understood that early on. And so it's just, again, it's a process.
Yeah. And I'd say even though maybe the average parent is not going to talk about this quite as much as you would with your kids, we still want to encourage them to have that conversation
Absolutely.
from a young age. You mentioned earlier that 12 to 16 is sort of that most targeted age group. But I mean, gosh, it is happening to kids at a younger and younger age.
Absolutely. And I've had situations with as young as second grade where parents have called and said, we found this on their phone and we didn't even realize they had internet access, and so, and predators are going to do what they can, and they're going to sort of like, working in law enforcement over the years, it was sort of like a game of chess. You figure out what the bad guys are doing and you try to make some changes to address that, and then they change the way they're doing things, and then as law enforcement, you readjust, and then they change it again. And so you've got to, as a parent, you've got to be 4 or 5 steps ahead, and so you've got to. Sometimes it includes educating yourself. A lot of this information I didn't know 15 years ago. And so when I started this process, I learned a lot. I went to classes. I took classes online to teach myself what I needed to know to be more effective at getting this information out. And as parents, we've got to do that.
Yeah, and so one of the things you said again and again is be the parent.
Yeah.
And so what kind of conversations should parents be having with their kids? What age should they start having these conversations to help protect them from the online exploiters?
I don't think there's really any age that's too young. If they've got access to a device that can access the internet, you need to be having these discussions, age-appropriate discussions. I'm not saying talk about sex trafficking with a 6-year-old, but you do need to understand and having discussions, because so many families now, both parents work, so the child's going into daycare or even at school. And so they're around people that are not family. It's important to have those discussions. And you may say, well, it's a school and I trust the teachers. We could have a list as long as this table of teachers who have done inappropriate things with kids. And I've got multiple cases that I've worked in East Tennessee of that very thing. So it's important to have those conversations early on. These are things that should be said. These are things that should not be said. The whole stranger danger thing. I know it's a cliche but it's absolutely imperative that you make sure your kids are aware. Anytime that they are old enough to where they're away from mom and dad, it's important that they understand these concepts. What is okay to touch? What is not okay to touch? And I know that's getting a little graphic, but what's okay to say and what's not okay to say? And even if that, God forbid, be a family member, you need to make sure your kids are aware. As soon as they're old enough to understand, or be around other people, you need to make sure they understand what's appropriate and what's not. And online, it's the same thing. If your child has a device that has access to the internet, you need to make sure that they understand what a predator is. And even if I don't have a etched in stone age for a kid to have a device, my personal feeling is no one under the age of 14, no child under the age of 14 has any reason to have a social media platform. If there's something online that they need to do for their school, which more schools are having interaction online, then that's fine. But you need to lock those devices down, lock it down like it's Fort Knox. There shouldn't be anything allowed on that device that you are not specifically aware of. And I would even argue 16 for some social media platforms. And then there's some that I think they should never have, and that my kids don't have, even now as adults and in college, just because I think they inherently they're not all bad, but they're more bad than good, and more potential for bad than some of the other platforms. But I think having those conversations as early as your situation would dictate. I've got a couple that I'm talking to right now, and their kids are young. I think 8, 4, and 3, and they're already like, I don't know what to do because everything is digital. And so I'm walking through the processes with them, and they're implementing these things early on in their kids' lives as young as 3 years old. So I don't really think there's a time that's too early. If they can access the internet, you need to be having those discussions.
Yeah, and one of the things I think that's really important that you noted was, your son in college came to you and said, "Hey, I want this accountability," and that was all fostered through the engagement that you had with him throughout those other formative years.
Absolutely.
And so I think the engagement's the big piece, because you can set up all the home internet security stuff that you want, and all they have to do on their cell phone that you've given them, cellular internet to, is turn off Wi-Fi and connect to cellular, and suddenly you've lost control there.
Exactly.
And so I think that's important for people to know too, is don't give yourself a false sense of security that I set up great internet home security, like I'm good to go. No, all they have to do is flip off, the Wi-Fi, and then suddenly they're back connected to the internet again. Yeah. I spoke to a group of middle school moms recently about phones and internet safety. And one of the things that while I was researching for that I really kind of found is I had to open up and said, "Hey, y'all need to know I'm about to step on your toes a little bit. I hope that's okay. And it doesn't matter if it's not, because I'm going to do it anyways." But a lot of the things that they're doing with phones, or the way that they're interacting online, are things that they're learning from you that you're mirroring. Mm-hmm. And so you have to check yourself really first, because your kids are going to mimic what they see from you. We would get onto the kids for scrolling all the time, but what are you doing when you're there on the couch all the time? And so when they're doing it, they're just modeling what they've seen happen in their house. And so creating that relationship, I think is really, really, really key.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you've mentioned too, you've started having these, these conversations. You go speak somewhere, and then somebody comes up and says, like, "Hey, I need help here personally in my situation." So if a parent suspects that something is wrong, we're smarter, a little bit smarter than the kids give us credit for. We know when something's wrong with one of our kids.
Right.
So you start to suspect this. How do you coach those parents to start those conversations with their kid, and try to basically try to put the toothpaste back into the tube?
Well, one thing I would encourage, and just because I've seen so many situations like this, is you don't tell them it's okay. What they've done is okay, but at the same time, you don't blast them. You don't beat them over the head, and you're horrible. And so you've got to be careful about it, because what that'll wind up doing is they'll retreat and not give you any information. And then again, with in my situation, it was a matter of ongoing communication with our kids, to where, like you said, we knew when something was going wrong, and it didn't take, because we had developed that relationship early on, it didn't take a ton. A lot of parents haven't done that. So it's going to be one of those situations where you've got to handle a situation with kid gloves. Sometimes it takes getting someone from the outside, because a lot of times we're too close to it as parents. And it's hard to navigate those waters. So having someone that you can call on to intermediate, whether it be an adult that is, whether it be in law enforcement, whether it be a pastor or a counselor, or you can reach out to Street Hope, you can reach out to different organizations who specialize in that specific thing, if you need assistance with that. But I think the biggest thing is make sure that they understand, and I'll share a little story to explain why I'm saying this. Make sure they understand that they know that you love them, and that regardless of what they've done, it doesn't change how you feel about them. They may have messed up, and there may be repercussions. There may be consequences for their actions, but you need to make sure that they understand that you love them. And the story behind that, a case from several years back, young girl got involved in a similar situation. She wound up posting a picture, and it wound up being shared. Got bullied at school, beat up at school. Dad picks her up from school, and on the way home, nothing was said. Ultimately, several weeks later, this young lady committed suicide. And in the interview with Dad, he said, when I picked her up from the school all the way home, never spoke a word. He said, I didn't know what to say to her because we didn't have that relationship. And so don't let it be that you are so detached from your kids and what they're doing that you don't know how to respond to that. Sometimes that's where we're at, and that's why it's important that we have an outlet. Another situation was the girl talking about her abductor, different situations. She said, I trusted him more than anybody else. Mm-hmm. She's 14 years old. He's 53 years old, and had never met him in person, just online. And she said, I trusted him more than anybody else. As parents, shame on us if that's the case. Because that's our ultimate, if you're a parent, that's your ultimate job in life, is to protect your kids.
Yeah.
And whatever that means to do that, that's what you need to do.
Yeah, I think there's maybe even a dose of humility that we need to take there. And one of the things that the current generation really appreciates is authenticity. That is really important to this upcoming generation. And so to start the conversation, it may begin with, hey, I need you to know that I have not done a good job of stewarding this, and that as parents, we are not perfect and we're going to make mistakes. And so from this point forward, we're going to do a better job of doing this. And so opening the conversation up just with just that humility of like, hey, I haven't done a good job with this. I want to start now, though. Like, we can't go any further until we start now. And so like today is that day that we're going to start to have these conversations. Things are going to change. It's going to be tough. You're going to be frustrated with me, and I know that ahead of time. But it's okay because I'm so responsible for your safety.
And that's across the board with everything, even apart from the whole social media and online stuff. I mean, just in life in general, there's things that I've done, and I've done the exact same thing. Go back to my kids. Hey, I didn't handle this right. But by the grace of God and through the grace of God, we'll move forward from this. But we need to understand that, and it really shows later in life. And you're talking about kids mirroring what the parents are doing. We're involved in a situation where we're spending some time online looking at venues and different stuff that we're doing right now. And so this was about 2 weeks ago. My wife and I are both on the couch, and I'm looking at different things that we're looking for this event that's coming up. And my wife is looking at different things, and my daughter is sitting there. She goes, who would think I would be in a house full of screenagers? Because she was trying to say something to us, and neither one of us were paying attention. We were on our phones, just looking at whatever. And so you're right. That's what they look at. And so we just did it at church. We just did a book that really taps into a lot of that, and it shows the effect of, or the change in our perspectives personally as with the increase of social media. So since about 2012, when social media really started going nuts, the rise of social media coincides with the rise of teen depression and anxiety and the whole 9 yards. And the whole thing with time on screen. Grades across the board, both in the United States and in Europe, drop accordingly to the time spent on screens. So it's a lot. It's a whole big group of things, not just the online predators, but it's the whole thing that we need to educate ourselves on how to effectively navigate that whole world. And part of it is taking ownership for our failings. That we've not done exactly the right thing all the time. So
yeah, absolutely.
Gosh, y'all are both full of knowledge. I love this conversation. I wish we could keep doing it all day. Ted, if there is one thing that you wish parents would take away from today's conversation, what would you leave them with?
I'll just say it: be the parent. Our job as a parent is to protect our kids, and if that means getting involved in what they're doing at school, getting involved in what they're doing in their personal lives, even my kids are my kids, whether they're 21 or whether they're 8. So having that involvement as it pertains to social media, you've got to know what's going on. You need to know who their friends are. You need to be looking at their friends list. Protect them from downloads. Okay. A lot of platforms automatically you can password protect purchases, online purchases. You need to go one step further and password protect online downloads. Period. There are a lot of free apps and free platforms that are as dangerous, if not more so, than the ones that you pay for. So if you're only password protected for purchases to keep them from buying something, then you've not gone far enough. You need to make sure that you're aware. And again, engage in what they're doing. It doesn't mean tell them they can't be on the internet, but be there with them. Know what they've got going on. Again, my son liked the game, and a couple of things I didn't mind doing. A couple of things I was like, man, this is just ridiculous, but I spent the time anyway. Some of the stuff that my daughter does, the same way. We engage with that. So you've got to be the parent. And for the last 10 years, that is what I've got on the end of every one of my presentations. You got to be the parent, be the parent, be the parent. And real quick story where I got that from. One of the very first presentations I did, probably close to 15 years ago, was a group of Methodist women here in East Tennessee, and probably about 70 women in the group, and the average age was probably 65 to 70. And as I'm doing the presentation, a younger lady, probably in her 40s, said, so, we talked about how do you protect your kids, and she said, well, I think my daughter may be involved in an online relationship that's maybe not appropriate. What should I do? And I said, well, you go online and you look at who she's talking to and you read the text messages. And she goes, well, I don't want to invade her privacy. And there was a collective gasp in the room. And so I'm giving her the benefit of the doubt. I'm thinking, well, maybe this is an adult child who's moved home and she's 18, 19, 20, and she's wanting to give her some freedom. And I said, well, how old is your daughter? Well, she's 13. Well, then a larger gasp. And I started to say something, and the lady sitting next to her, 81-year-old lady sitting next to her, poked her in the ribs, and she said, girl, be that child's mama. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, my presentation is complete. Be the mama, be the dad. You got to be the parent. That is our job. And if more parents would be the parent, we would have a lot less occurrences of this stuff happening. I firmly 100% believe that.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Ted.